Welcome. In this screencast, I'm going to talk about properties of matter. Properties of matter is commonly defined as characteristics or behavior of matter. So what that means is these are properties that help us identify and classify matter, and also helps us identify and classify the changes that different types of matter can undergo. So properties are generally classified as being either physical or chemical in nature. It's kind of like true or false questions. It's either physical or it's chemical. So physical properties are the easier ones to understand and observe, I think, and they're commonly defined as a characteristic that can be observed or measured without changing the sample's chemical composition. So what does that mean in real words or real English? It just means that these are things you can observe about a substance, usually just by looking at it. For example, your height, your hair color, your eye color, your weight, those are all physical properties of you. Some more common physical properties that we use as far as identifying different substances are things like density, color, odor, hardness, state, melting point. Physical properties sometimes depend on the amount or size of your sample, like mass or volume, but other physical properties for a substance actually remain the same regardless of the sample size, like density or boiling point. Think about it. Boiling point for water is 100 degrees. It doesn't say how big your sample of water is, just that it's water, boils at 100 degrees Celsius. This is the difference between extensive and intensive physical properties. Extensive physical properties depend on the sample size you have, like mass, volume, length, even the intensity of color. Those things are all going to change with the sample size. They're going to increase as the sample size increases, decrease as the sample size decreases. So extensive properties won't help identify what kind of substance you have, but that doesn't make them any less helpful to chemists. We still often need to know things like mass and volume when we're using different substances in the lab. Intensive physical properties, however, do not depend on the sample size you have. These would be things like density, conductivity, boiling point, and freezing point. Intensive physical properties are independent of the sample size. That just means not dependent on the sample size. So they won't change even if the size of your sample changes. So intensive physical properties apparently are dependent on the actual particles in the substance. So no matter how small a sample you have, those particles are going to be the same particles, arranged the same way, attracted to each other the same way. So it doesn't matter how big or small a substance you have, since it's actually dependent on the particles in the substance. This makes intensive physical properties an excellent way to identify a substance. Chemical properties are also an excellent way to identify substances. A chemical property is often defined as the ability of a substance to combine with or change into one or more other substances. Examples would be iron combining with air to form rust. Now, this isn't usually a desirable chemical reaction, but it's certainly one we have to be aware of when we own cars and other items made with iron. Gasoline combining with oxygen to form carbon dioxide and water. Again, it's not so much that we want the products of carbon dioxide and water, but gasoline combining with oxygen means we have energy to power our vehicles, our toys, heat our homes, etc. So chemical properties require that the substance change its chemical composition. Usually, it's the result of your substance having contact with another substance or with an energy source like electricity or heat, and the fancy word for heat is just thermal energy. Another thing to note is that the inability of a substance to undergo a chemical change can be as important as something that can undergo a chemical change. For example, you may want something to be flammable, but oftentimes we want things that are non-flammable. We want metals that are non-rusting. So sometimes we describe the inability or the lack of a chemical property of a substance as being a positive thing. So to wrap up, properties of matter help us identify different substances out there, and the two main categories are physical and chemical. Chemical properties always change the substance and can always help identify your substance. Physical properties are generally observed without changing the substance and they may or may not be able to help identify your substance.